Welcome back to another episode of the Driven Exchange podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Send Now. It's the email deliverability suite of the future, and it's what we use at our company to get 10,000 cold outbound emails out every single month without fail, whilst keeping our health in check. I really want to say thank you for the support, the appreciation, and the feedback about these episodes. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Guys, welcome back. We've got another episode of the Red Line Hustle Hub, and today I am privileged to have John Barrows in the house. 2014 was the first year I got out of prison. I was a security guard. In 7 months of working a booth for 15 months, I got very bored, and I found you, along with Grant
Oh,
Cardone.
yeah?
Yep. My
Oh, shit,
2 hour
yeah.
my 2 hour commutes home consisted of listening to you and your podcast and some of the industries you're in. And now I'm actually in front of you, which is an absolute blessing for me. So today I want to introduce you as a massive guest on the show. Who are you, John? What do you do and why do you do it? Let's run the Hustle Hub
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on here, Shane. And look, appreciate the support too, man. You never know with these podcasts and everything else, you never know who's actually listening
Mm-hmm.
and the impact that you make,
Yep.
right? So to hear that, that kind of makes it worth it. So I appreciate that. But yeah, me, the CEO of my own little sales training company here, JV Sales. I've been doing this for a while now, but I got into it. Back up. I grew up here in Boston, went down to school in Maryland, drank my way through 4 years of college, just because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, got my degree in marketing, and kind of fell into sales. Back then, I'm 47 now. So back 27 years ago, there wasn't, or 28, 29 years ago, there wasn't really a major in
Mm-hmm.
sales, right? You couldn't go to the university and get your degree. So marketing was the closest thing, and I kind of fell into sales just like everybody else. So my first job was with DeWalt Power Tools, driving around, giving away free tools to construction workers, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
It was kind of sales, but it wasn't. It was more event marketing, but they had it under the umbrella of
Mm-hmm.
sales. Then they promoted me to run a Home Depot division, which is where sales kind of was more, right? Because Home Depot obviously had to buy DeWalt, but I had to take that $10,000 order and turn it into a $100,000 order, right? Through sell throughs and all that other stuff. Did that, and then I sold for Xerox. That's where I learned how to really
Mm-hmm.
sell. So I sold copiers to the government, which is about as bad as it gets. Um, but the good news is Xerox had like a killer sales training program. And so even though I didn't know about it, it was like world
Mm-hmm.
renowned. Like it was one of those, they had this 8-week sales training program. Like for those of you who don't know, Xerox actually invented quote unquote solution selling. So the whole idea of like asking people questions before you actually present, like they defined that, which was cool.
This one,
Um,
right?
there you go. Solution selling. Yeah, I think late 70s, early
Yeah.
80s is when they did that. And so that's where I learned how to, sell, take rejection, all that stuff. And then I started a company with a few buddies of mine from high school. So a couple of friends of mine started a company doing outsourced IT services to the SMB market. And I was the fourth person to jump on board with them to run sales and marketing. But I was like 23, right? So I had no fucking idea what I was doing. So I took every training I could. I took Sandler, Miller, Hyman, Taz, Spin, you name it. I was taking them all, right? And I came across this one group called Basho, and it was the first training that I really liked because it was super tactical. It wasn't this big theory about selling or this huge process I had to follow. It was like, hey, here's how to send an email, send an email. Here's how to make a phone call, make a phone call, right? So I loved it because it was super tactical. Used it, helped grow, thrive up. We ended up being the fastest growing company in Massachusetts for a few years in a row, got us to about 12 million in revenue and about 85 employees, and then sold off to Staples. And we were self-funded, so it was a pretty good ride. So Staples came and bought us. And then I spent about a year going through that integration. Come to find out, apparently I'm not a corporate guy. Uh, I don't have much of a filter, and I really don't like playing politics. So after a little while, Staples offered me another position. They fired me, and and I was looking for a job, and Basho came knocking and said, "John, you want to be a trainer?" And I was like, "No." They're like, "Why not?" I'm like, "I don't like trainers," and because up until that point in my career, the only type of sales trainers I'd ever come across were either failed sales professionals or professional
Yeah.
presenters. Right. And if you've ever been through a training where you could just tell the trainer's never actually done what they're telling you what to do, or if they did
Yeah.
it was like 20, 30 years ago back in my day, and they're wearing some suit that's 3 sizes too big, and they're doing some role play that would never actually happen in real life. Right. Like I didn't want to be that guy. And they were like, don't worry, you have to use these techniques to sell so you can train so you can get paid. I was like, all right, I like the whole practice what you preach thing. Right. So I joined Basho, took on some bigger accounts, brought on some bigger ones, and then to make a very long story short, they screwed it up and I took it over. So back about I want to say about 12 years ago at this point, went off on my own with JB Sales and took my clients and brought some new ones. So now I'm working with companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, Box, Dropbox, Okta, Google, Amazon, and training their sales teams on techniques and tactics to level up,
Mhm.
right? But really doing my best to elevate this profession because my why, if you ask like why do I do what it
Mhm.
is, right? It's to elevate the people and profession of sales by sharing my experience because I genuinely think that sales is one of the greatest professions in the world when done right.
Mhm.
It's one of the worst when done wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to help people do it right with integrity, with hard work and all that other stuff. But I say sales is not like, for instance, sales isn't about convincing anybody
Mhm.
of anything. Like if you're trying to convince somebody, I think you're doing it wrong.
100%.
Sales is about helping people solve problems or achieve goals, and if you can do that, you're doing a good job, and you'll be financially rewarded because of it. So it's one of those professions that allows a lot of freedom for a lot of people. People who might be in really tough situations, right?
Mhm.
They might not have grown up with a silver spoon in their mouth. They might have all the opportunities. Well, sales is one of those careers, man. You the harder you work, usually the more you get paid.
Yep.
And there's no limit to it, right? So I think it provides a lot of freedom for a lot of different types of people out there. And I'm just trying to get the word out there to as many people as I can.
Well, you got it out there very quickly because I heard it about what? Well, now it's 7 years ago. I heard it and I paid attention.
Yeah.
So, one thing you mentioned, right? So you went through a few big companies, and you invested in yourself, which is something that I find very,
Mhm.
very interesting. When I first got into my sales roles, the only affordability assessment I had was what I was getting paid, right? And assessing if I could
Yep.
actually afford it. And the only thing I could afford was free YouTube. And that's obviously how I came across a number of
Yep.
people. And it wasn't until I quit my business. Sorry, I quit the last company I was at, New Statesman Media. It's one of
Mhm.
the biggest publications in the UK. It was only then the first thing I chose to do after never receiving training, never any paid structured training, always go do it yourself. Just go on LinkedIn, find some leads, call some people, find out the competitors, and
Yep.
that's it. That was the baseline I had. Everything else is second
Yep.
voicing, then having your boss stand over your shoulder, which you probably already know about too. And then
Oh
when I
yeah.
started Sales Driven in June of 2020, the first thing I did was call Sandler because I met Marcus Kauke. I'm sure you know him.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I invested in training for 7 months. And within 2 months, I had my first biggest return. And it came from the simple question of instead of me pitching a webinar, which is what I used to sell for 10 grand, 10 grand, 100
Mhm.
qualified leads, big audience, 13 publications, so on and so forth. It's 10,500, but because I knew how shit the product was, I knew my discount was 5,500, and I was just like,
Right.
you know what? Just take it for 5,500. I don't even care, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
not realizing how much I was impacting my commission, how much my earning
Mhm.
potential was being impacted, my credibility, my reputation,
Yep.
all of that stuff. And then when it didn't actually deliver, I'm paying for that with having to develop new business. So back three
Yep.
minutes ago, what type of thinking was your mind on to invest in training? At the age of 23, I was taking Percocets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, I had my fair share of fun too, my friend. So, but I think it was one of those, the information's out there, right? And I never liked waiting for anybody to
Mhm,
to it always kills me when I hear reps be like, well, my company hasn't invested in me, my company hasn't done this, and they're waiting for
mhm,
somebody else to dictate their success. I just never really fundamentally understood that. And I always knew I wasn't the smartest cat out there by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew I could outwork
mhm,
people. And so the things that I could figure I could control was my work ethic. So I just worked my ass off. And I went to a bunch of free trainings. I knew, actually, I'll tell you this right now. One of the easiest, it's sad, but one of the easiest things to negotiate is sales training. Because all like say somebody's giving a workshop or
Yep,
something like that, you know what I
yep,
mean? Like all you got to do is call into like the frontline sales rep as an inbound lead and be like, say the seminar is like $2,000,
yeah,
right? All you gotta do is call them up and be like, "Yo, I really wanna go to this, but, like, I only have $500," or something like that. "Is there anything you can do?" They will absolutely drop their pants. It's the saddest thing because 'cause you're like, you're probably gonna go, like, to, negotiation training, and they're dropping it by 75% right out the gate,
Yep.
right? So, it's usually because those reps aren't practicing what they preach, but the person who's delivering it usually has some pretty good content. And so, it was the same. Like I remember leaving from Xerox, right? And here's something, right? I worked my ass off at Xerox, and I had some big accounts, right? But I had probably 5 or 6 reps in my territory in less than 3 years. So nobody trusted Xerox at all. So when I got plugged in, because I interviewed pretty well and they thought I was hot shit,
Mhm.
whatever. So where all my other friends were flipping copiers almost immediately, right? I would go into these state accounts and they'd be like, whatever, like we're not even gonna talk to you. Like we'll see another one of you in 6 months, leave, right? So I had to really take a very methodical approach, like bottom up, learn the businesses, come with real ROI to business cases. So after about like I didn't sell shit for 9 months, and I almost got
Mhm.
fired, right? But I pushed back on my boss because they're like, "Oh, I thought you were hot shit." I'm like, "Look, you gave me a territory that's been burned to the fucking ground. Like,
Mm.
give me some time to repair these
Mhm.
relationships." And because of that, about a year and a half in, I had some pretty big ass contracts that are about to land. And I remember I had this one where, when my buddies started their company,
Mhm.
right, the one that I joined with them, there was 3 founders, and one of them, like I knew 2 of them from growing up in high school, but the one of them was the CEO, kind of a
Mhm.
jackass. And I remember he pushed on me that I had to start like, December 20th or like December 15th or something like that. And I'm like, dude, just let me wait until January 1st. Because if I wait till January 1st, I'm going to get that commission check for like 30 grand. And at that time, my base salary was 30
Mhm.
grand. So that check was huge. That was, I mean, more money than I'd even thought of,
Mhm.
right? And I made the and he was a jerk. He was like, "No, if you don't start, we're gonna find somebody else." And I think he was playing like douchebag negotiation tactics. But I made the conscious decision to say, you know what? All right, like I'm gonna forego that 30 grand because this is my path. This is gonna help me. I don't like the corporate world. I like I want to try this startup. So I forego that. And in addition to that, going back to investing myself, he had said to me, "Well, I want you to start and you need to come with like 50 leads that you're going to call like day one." And I'm like, "Dude, I don't even know what the fuck we sell right now. Like I don't even like how you expect this shit." And I remember, and this was way back in the day, right? Where you didn't have like LinkedIn was not even a
Mm.
thing, right? And so I had to sign up for there was these Dun and Bradstreet had these
Yep, I
CDs, like
remember.
these legit CDs, and you had to buy them once a quarter, and every quarter they would come out with a new set with all new
Mhm.
contact information and demographic stuff. And then there was also, no joke, the public library. So I went to the Boston Public Library where there's all these businesses that have to be registered in a certain way, and I ended up, I spent $800, which I did not have, by the way. At that time, I did not have that kind of money. I spent $800 out of my own pocket to get those DVDs, or CDs from Dun and Bradstreet, and then go to the library to get these. And I ended up coming like finding the exact demographic of who we were going after in our state. And I ended up coming with a list of like 1,000 names day one, and I just dumped it on my CEO's desk. I'm like, "Yeah, what?" And he was like, "Damn, where'd you get right?" And so my point is like there's all the excuses in the world of what not like, "Oh, I don't have this resource," but that's
Mhm.
bullshit, man. You can get a Harvard education right now. Like every course at Harvard is online for
Yep.
free. Now you won't get the degree, you won't get the stamp, but you can still get the Harvard education,
Mhm.
right? And so it's just the willingness to go get it,
Yep.
right? And I think that's what's lacking a little bit these days is the resourcefulness. I mean, the amount of information that's out there right now, like as much as I want to try to drive people towards my membership and pay for what I got and all that other stuff, and the amount of shit that's out there for free is so like, I mean, you could train yourself on anything these days. You just got to put in the work,
100%.
right? And that's what I don't think a lot of people are willing to do.
100%. I think some of those outlets that weren't available then, the fact that you have them today, it makes making any amount of money. I think Patrick Bet David said it best. He goes, "Making $1 million is the easiest it's ever been in 2022." Was when he
Oh,
did it at the Driven conference, right? And I
yep,
believe it's true
yep,
because I passed 1 million in sales revenue. Recognized revenue is eight hundred
yep,
and forty-seven thousand dollars, right? 150 shy,
sure,
but my
yep,
business is not done yet. And in terms of
hmm
achieving that, that was through watching My First Million. by Shampuri and
Yep.
Sampal. Dope ass podcast. Andy Frisella, Patrick David.
Yep.
Grant Cardone was influential for about 3 months in 2014, and then I got
Mhm.
tired of his shit. And then I did
Yeah.
watch him, and now in terms of what
Mhm.
he's moved from sales training into capital markets and investment on the commercial real estate side, he's managing
Yep.
billions now, right? And he's
Mhm.
actually helping people return their investments back to them. And what you mentioned too, in terms of the Rolodex, I was one of my first jobs was a pizza delivery driver. Then my dad worked at Goldman Sachs. I always
Mhm.
saw like what kind of life you can have if you do step into wealth
Yep.
management. And being a UK citizen, I moved to New Jersey in '99 when I was 13. Went through high school, middle
Mhm.
school, high school, everything. And in town, Franklin Lakes, New Jersey, there was a ton of
Mhm.
people that were just fucking loaded beyond belief. And I remember some of the most, what were they? Constant conversations on dinner tables
Mhm.
when I was 15, 16 were about investing in stocks, bonds, right?
Yep.
That was the knowledge then. Capital markets was
Mhm.
then what I got into. But then, like I said, my journey of not having access to what I thought I should be using, getting through that
Right.
information, absorbing it, taking on the biggest thing I always said was execution of it. You can do as
Oh,
much
absolutely.
fucking shit as you want. If you don't execute, is why I fell out with my business partner because I always had a lot of ideas.
Mhm.
We'd run into issues and I'd say, da 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 da, da, we're in this place right now. What do we do? Well, I knew about that already. Well, why the fuck didn't you say anything then?
Yeah.
Like we've been struggling for
No,
the
I
past 3 months, right? And that was one of my
right.
failures. And that's what leads us into like the next part of the show, which is failures in my mind has been my accelerated path to success, right? It's
Mhm.
accelerated learning, and that's how I think about it.
Absolutely.
The behaviors, the treatment, the environment I went through rehabs, addiction, prison, being shipped out of the country,
Mhm.
then going into 3 different sales environments to starting up my own company. I went through
Mhm.
fucking thousands of failures, but I also have hundreds of different solutions now that are
Yep.
guaranteed to work. So for you,
Yep.
when you left Xerox, very
Mhm.
interesting point. Did you consider it a setback, of failure, and what kind of learnings did you get from that? And if that wasn't the biggest failure, what was the biggest failure next to that?
No, I mean, I left Xerox on a high note, so I don't think that was and I don't look at failures at all. Like I mean, I look at failures as something that you don't learn from, right? If you don't learn from it, then it's a failure,
Mhm.
right? If you learn from it, as far as I'm concerned, it ain't a
Of
failure.
course.
In Xerox, I was top rep there and I walked out. I left 30 grand on the table. So that was me walking away from
Mhm.
them, not them walking away from me. So I wouldn't consider that. And we started a company self-funded and we were really successful. I'd say probably the one that I would lean on though is when I got fired from Staples.
Okay.
Like when they fired me, right? It was one of those things. It was a bunch of learning lessons. Like it was one of those things where I knew I wasn't the right. Like after 7 years with this startup, like I kind of figured out the model. So I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of getting bored because there wasn't like we had figured out like I had implemented the predictable revenue model before it
Mhm.
was predictable revenue. So we had figured out a really scalable, and we were the fastest growing in the whole thing. And but there wasn't really a lot next for me, right? And so when this acquisition came around, I was like, oh, this is cool. I get to be the point person now to integrate my little $10 million company into a $20 billion organization. Like this is something cool, right? And I remember I'll hit on like probably 3 or 4 learning lessons. I remember I think we were like 26, 27 when we were getting this acquisition going, maybe 28. And we didn't know what we were doing. So we had a consultant come in and talk to us about like, hey, what happens when they do due diligence on a business? And he came in and was like, look, this is the type of questions they're going to ask and all this other stuff. So he gave us answers that we should give,
Mhm.
right? And I'm probably one of the worst liars you'll come across because
Me
I
too.
like I'm about as transparent as it gets. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And when I don't believe in something, it's obvious. And so they gave me some answers that I should have said that I didn't feel right about. But I was a minority shareholder, so I didn't want to screw it
Mhm.
up. So this guy, Jay Baitler, came in and he ran a $12 billion part of Staples, right? Not the stores,
Mhm.
the corporate side of the
Okay.
house, right? And he comes in and he interviews each one of the executives, right? And there's 6 of us, and he asked me, he's like, "So John, what do you think about the acquisition?" And I remember like being like, oh, you're really excited about this. It's gonna be, blah blah. And in the back of my head, I'm like, you guys are just gonna chew us up and spit us out. Like this is gonna be a fucking disaster. Blah blah blah. Right? But I told the company
Yeah.
line, and that moment, what happened was, Jim, my CEO at the time, who had brokered the deal, he did a follow up with Jay afterwards. Like, so what'd you think about the management group? And Jay was like, oh man, you got a solid manager. He's like, the one I'm concerned with is John. And Jim was like, what? He's like, out of anybody I thought you wouldn't be concerned with, John, like he's the heart and soul of this
Mm.
business. Like I would bleed blue,
Yeah.
right? And I was the one who rah everything. But Jim kind of fought for me, right, to keep me on board, and then protected me. And I always felt like like if Jay and I just had a beer, like I thought we would have been able
Yeah.
to really see eye to eye,
Mm.
right? But Jim was afraid that my filter would come off and I'd say some dumb shit and I'd get fired, right?
Oh, wow.
So about 6 months in, I was super optimistic. I thought this was like I was going to be able to figure this out, and my team was executing at a much higher level. But what Staples they didn't do shit. Like literally all the things that they said they were going to do, nothing happened. And so I remember about 6 months in, I went from being very optimistic to being very pessimistic, right? And I vividly remember saying, the movie
Yeah, of
300,
course I do.
the
Yeah.
movie, right? So I remember, no joke. I remember sitting in my little 800 square foot apartment with my 50-inch high def, right, with surround sound at 3 o'clock in the morning, stoned off my ass, watching 300, and picturing myself as Leonidas and them as the Persians, right? Like, and I was like, I'm gonna beat them, right? And at that moment, I should have walked in and given my resignation. I should have just absolutely, because we were
Yeah.
them. They acquired us. We were
Yeah.
them. So for me to fight that was a bad idea. And because I was so negative now, there's no way you're going to win a situation when you're that negative about what's going
Yeah.
on. And so, but I didn't want to quit, right? And even though I knew to my core it was wrong and I was not the right person for this job, I kept fighting, right? And then eventually, about 6 months after that, so a year into it, they ended up firing me, right? Giving me like offering me they pretty much
Mm.
fired me, and I was devastated. And this was the biggest learning lesson. This is actually a closing technique. If you talk about closing
Mm.
techniques, it's called the doorknob close. It's basically when you lose a deal, right? You go back and you ask, "Hey, what's the real reason?"
Yeah.
Right? And the douchey sales rep version of that is, oh, you try to convince
Yeah.
them, like, "Oh, no, 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 we can do that." But I always do that just to learn,
Mhm.
right? Like, so I reached out to Jay after processing this, and I said, Jay, for my own personal and professional development, would you mind if I just took an hour of your time and could you give me some insights on what happened here so I can learn and grow from this, right? And this is a guy that I was told, don't talk to, John, scary, blah, blah, blah. When I showed up at his office in Framingham, Massachusetts, that motherfucker, like, he opens the door and he goes, John Barrows, get in here. And I was like, oh shit, right? And he goes, first of all, before we even get started here, he goes, the fact that you reached out to me looking for feedback based on what happened to you over the past year tells me more about you than I knew in the year working
Yeah.
with you. He's like, you have an hour of my time. I will tell you anything that you need. And I was like, Jay, I got 10 questions here. I came prepared. I'm like, I got 10 questions here. You can be as open and honest as you want to be, right? He's like, I will answer. And that hour, no joke, was probably my MBA.
Mm.
Like, I got my MBA during that hour. I learned more about business and myself in that hour with his feedback. And another learning lesson was the I call it, what's the
Mm.
risk? I actually wrote a blog post on this one because I asked him, I said, Jay, would you have been open to a conversation like this when I worked for you? And he's like, well, of course I would have. Why didn't you think I would have? I was like, well, I was told I couldn't. And I was trying to be, and they're like, John, and he's like, well, let me ask you, what would have been the risk of you approaching me? I was like, what do you mean? What's the risk? I would have, like, I could have gotten fired. I'm like, I could have gotten fired. I'm like, I have people who depended on me and all this
Yeah.
other stuff. And he goes, John, let me paint two scenarios for you. He goes, say you went over your CEO's head and you reached out to me, right? And I was a dick. Like, I just ripped you apart and I told on you to your boss and all that
Brilliant.
other stuff, like
Like,
early days. He's like, would you have wanted to work for me at that point? And I was like, well, no. He's like, so do you think you would have made your own choices on how you would have exited and it would have been a little bit better for you? I'm like, yeah,
wow.
probably. He goes, okay, now let's flip it over. Say you go over your boss's head, your CEO's head, and we have this conversation and it's really healthy. And he's like, do you think you and I would have had a better relationship? And do you think your life over the past year would have been a lot easier? I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, I'm going to ask you again, what's the risk? So I was like, okay. So that's a learning lesson for me. Is like, I always now I used to say always have a plan B. I actually
Mhm.
disagree with that because your plan B, I think,
Yep.
distracts from your plan A. But now, whenever I make decisions, I ask myself, what's the worst case scenario? Like, if I do this, what is the worst case scenario? And if I'm okay with that worst case scenario, I do it. If I'm not okay with that worst case scenario, I try to come up with
Mhm.
another option. So that was one learning lesson and another one. And then the final learning lesson was, let's fast forward. I get the opportunity. Now I'm on my own. I'm doing my own business, doing sales training. And I get this call out of the blue from some kid I had helped out a long time ago. And he was recruiting for a VP of sales position for Jack Welch.
Okay.
So Jack Welch,
Yep.
GE, the CE, like the CEO of GE, right? If
Yep.
you look him up, for those listeners who are under 40 years old, you
I
probably don't
know
know
who
who
he
he is.
is.
He's yeah, you literally go like he was the CEO of the
Yeah.
century. Forbes magazine made him CEO. Fortune made him manager of the century. Okay, not decade, century. I had the opportunity. He was starting an online MBA program, and he was looking for a VP of sales. And this somehow, because I helped this kid out, whatever, I got the opportunity to work for Jack Welch. And I'd gone through the interview, and that's a whole nother story. But when they were looking for references, guess who I gave him
That
as a
guy you went into
reference?
the office with. Wow.
Jay. And Jay Baitler. So when Jack Welch called Jay Baitler for a reference for me, the guy who fired me, and said and asked him about me and whatever, you know what Jay Baitler said to Jack Welch? He said, if you don't hire John Barrows, you're an idiot. So I got the opportunity to work for Jack Welch and Susie Welch for about 3 or 4 months on their online MBA program. It didn't end up working out, and that's a different story. But I got to work for the man, the myth, the legend for 3 months because I went back and got referred by the guy who fired me because I cared enough about my own personal development to learn from
I
him.
think that's a huge thing, like, not only in the workplace, but even in, like, I'm going through it right now with a divorce, and it's just that
Yep.
ownership, right? That accountability for your own future. If
Yep.
you want to continue to fuck up in life, don't ask how to make shit better, right?
Don't
Don't
ask.
ask, don't get. And that was one
Yep.
thing I always understood very, very
Yep.
clearly. It's why I've got myself in so much trouble too. But then again, as a result of the trouble I've gotten into, I've
Yep.
achieved things that some people would never even dream of. Absolutely, right? And I'm
Yep.
not the most privileged, smartest kid in the world. I've gone through a great life. I've fucked it up completely. I've started from scratch. I've gone
Mhm.
to the top, and now I'm back on like an upward rise again of a challenge.
Mhm.
But asking that question, like, all right, so tell me where I fucked up. Tell me what would have been different, right? Had we looked at it the other way,
Mhm.
would we have a different outcome, right? And that just that ownership, that accountability means so much. A great example,
Yeah.
right? It's funny that you actually said that. One of these guys that I hired back in 2022. So I hired a fractional rep. He was an appointment booker. He
Mhm.
managed on part time, 2 hours a day. He managed to secure us 100K of revenue for our client on appointment setting, dude, in our
Yep.
first business. And you know how
Right.
shitty appointment setting
Shit.
is. Appointment setting sucks, right? I fucking
Brutal.
hate it. And
Yep.
he brought on this lovely kid, right? Lovely kid from Tamil, India. Very bright, just very open, very kind. He kept him under kind of the radar, got him to build data for us, and for 2 years he was in the booth building data, cleaning data, building lists for us, right?
Yep.
Then we got him to research. Then he's from thousands of leads. He started 40 solid leads, right? And started
Mhm.
verifying them. And then, like I mentioned to you, I went through a situation where I worked with a private equity investor. He had sold his business for 135 million. I was like, dude, I'm working with this guy. I'm set for life. Little did I realize
Yep.
that after 6 months of working with this guy, chasing for payments, late payments, and all that shit, which I decided to
Yep.
offer him some value and say, look, instead of you paying me a retainer to do X, Y, and Z, I want to downsize my business. I'm going to optimize it. I'm going to give you the team that I have that runs the operation you are looking for. You pay them their salaries and you take them and go. Took another contract. That contract, $1 billion digital banking software company, saw the green light, $75,000 contract, fucked me over, right? Couldn't pay the team. One of
Mhm.
those individuals was that rep, and I couldn't pay him.
Mhm.
And he still offered to help me, still stuck by me. And it was only in May, June when I separated from my wife. He said I needed security, dude. Like I really need security. I can't do this anymore. And I said, look, go and find what you can. I'll support you in whatever way I can. Right now, I'm really fucked up, dude. Go and do what you need to. If there's
Yep.
anything I can help you with, do it." And then he said he wanted help again. We started working together, and then he just went quiet for 2 months. Yesterday, he messaged me back. He said, "Shane, I'm really sorry I went quiet on you. I need a favor, though." "What's the favor?" "I
Mhm.
need you to write me a certificate of employment for sales driven. I've just got a job at Freshworks as a business development rep."
Nice.
And I was like, "So
Nice.
you went from a £400 a month salary to now look where you are. Just because we went
Yep.
through this little up and down period, look where you are now, right?
Yep.
Why did you not
Yep.
message me and just tell me?" I was scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
"Well, what's the worst that could have happened to you, Boovie?"
What's the worst?
"Nothing, right?" Good
I
movie
didn't
with Martin Lawrence and Danny
Right.
DeVito on that. And now that he's successful, he's getting a job. We spoke about that. The
Mhm.
accountability and just him knowing from me too, number one, like, I'm not a prick, dude. Like, shit happens,
Right, right.
right? And I'm not gonna
Yep.
be mad at you for you going through your shit. If you need to own up and
Right.
do things you do, let me know. If I have to help you from far,
Yep.
I will. If I can help you from close, I will. And it makes the
Mhm.
biggest difference in the world, man. It makes the biggest difference in the world. And I've learned so many things from those mistakes and just asking, like, all right, how do I do this differently? Right. And then
Yeah.
it led me towards the path of how I was able to kind of consistently drive results. I always just went to
Mhm.
the best leader, the best manager, the best performer and said, all right, teach me how to do this. I'm going to do your steps. If it don't work, then
Yep.
obviously it's fucking something's wrong. And it always worked because I
Right.
followed the right people. Right.
Right.
And now I know what I want to do. And there's a few things I would have done differently had I known these things. I wouldn't change
Mhm.
anything, but had I known these things about 20 years ago. So for you, 47-year-old man, 20 years ago,
Mhm.
young lad, well, maybe 30 years ago, you know everything
Yeah.
you know now, right?
Yeah.
All the tools, all the tricks, all the things in the book. What's one consistent action, only one consistent action you would tell your 18-year-old self to do every day to shorten the path to success?
One thing, huh? I think I would seek out more mentorship, or I would probably read more than I did. I've always kind of prided myself in a lot of ways of not reading and just kind of chart my own
Mm,
path. But the older I get, you know, I'll throw on. I've read a couple of books recently, like the E Myth, right? The E Myth
yeah.
Revisited. And man, I read that fucking book and I'm like, God damn, man, that just mapped out exactly like over the past year has been the past year's been a shit show,
Yep.
right? Like with the SaaS industry falling apart
Yep.
and all this other stuff. And no shit, as I'm reading that book, like literally everything in that book is exactly what happened to me. And I'm like, God damn it, man, maybe I should have been paying attention, right? So I think I think the benefit of me like blindly just moving forward and just grinding through, because I've done things the hard
Yep.
way. Like I have grinded my entire life. Like people think I'm like super rich. I'm not. Like I do
Mhm.
well, but I'm not like I can't just cash in and just coast for the
Yeah.
rest of my life. I grind every fucking
Mhm.
day, and so I think I would have kind of been more open to mirroring other people's success than trying to drive my own.
Okay.
And that's through books, through
Mhm.
mentorship or whatever. And I probably the best answer I think I ever got, and this is where it really solidified more. So actually going back for the Jack Welch interview, when I interviewed with Jack Welch, I also interviewed with the college that he had tied his university to. And the guy asked me, he's like, John, why do you want to go outside of working for Jack Welch? Obviously, he's like, you got a pretty successful business, you got your own house, you run your own show. He's like, why do you want to leave that? And because I was in
Mhm.
Massachusetts and this job was down in Florida, so I had to move my whole floor. And he said, why would you want to come here? It's like if you got a successful thing going. And I said, well, I'm like, you ever play the game as a kid, Shoots and Ladders,
Mhm.
right? You know the game Shoots and
Yeah, we call it
Ladders, right?
snakes and
And it's
ladders
all these little
in
colored.
England. Yeah. Yeah,
What's
we
that?
call it snakes and ladders in England. So, yeah, you go up, and then if you catch a
Yeah.
thing, right back down, right?
Right, so there's all those little you draw the
Yep,
colors and you run rolls, but then you catch that
yep.
ladder, right? And you get jumped up for a little bit,
Yep.
right? And I said to the guy, I was like, "Look, I've been rolling singles and doubles my entire life. I go, eventually I'm going to get to where I want to go. But this opportunity to work for Jack
Mhm.
Welch, this is that ladder for me. This is going to help me skip a few
Yep.
steps." And that's why I want to work here. And he was like, that's a good fucking answer. I was like, I know. And so my point is, like, I've made it a lot harder on myself. Now, don't get me wrong, I am extremely proud, and I like of what I've
Mhm.
accomplished. I feel a genuine pride for where I am in my life because I've earned every fucking
Yeah.
dollar, right? And I know that. But I also look at people who do things, who work a lot less than I do and make a lot more money than I
Mhm.
do. And so I think there's breadcrumbs that I could have followed from other people that I didn't have to make as many mistakes as I
Yeah.
have, right? And that's, for me, that's part of the reason I do what I do from a training standpoint, is because I've made so many mistakes. And my hope is that by sharing those mistakes, that people can skip a few steps. I don't think you can't skip them
No,
all, right? You got to
definitely
go
not.
through the
Yeah.
pain, you got to go through the grit, you got to get your ass kicked every
Mhm.
once in a while. But my hope is that I can share enough that people don't have to make as many
Yeah.
mistakes as I did to get to this point. And so for me, just to put a pin on what you asked, it's to be more proactive about mirroring success that of people that I see value in, people who share my values and have achieved success the way I believe success should be
Mhm.
achieved. Like, I'll be quite frank with you, Grant Cardone, I fucking can't stand that dude. I think he's a dirtbag in every way, shape, and form. I think he's swindled people out of
Yep.
cash. I know he
Mhm.
has. I've followed his career, and he's a fucking
Yeah.
dirtbag. I don't want to mirror his success. I'd rather be dirt
Yep.
broke, dead
Yep.
serious, than be considered like
Yeah,
him,
100%.
right? But other people who I genuinely think have good values and have done things the right way, I should have probably mirrored what they did a lot more than I did, and I should have had check my ego aside a little bit more about me thinking I knew what the fuck I was doing when I obviously didn't.
Mate, it makes a lot of sense. It's about humbling yourself, right? And that's one thing I've had to do very, very quickly. It was when I understood I can control my subconscious and my mindset and how I think and approach life. I very quickly
Mhm.
changed other people's perceptions of me as well as how I approach them.
Yep.
And one of the easiest things
Yep.
I did, I'll touch on two things, which is wormholes and growth hacks,
Yep.
which is how we wrap it up. But in terms of with the hold on a second, I just lost my.
No, all right. I got you, man. It happens to me all the time. It's those Percocets creeping back in, man.
Dude, and the new drop just landed today, so there's a few little nice that is gonna happen after the show. So,
Nice.
so this is the
Nice.
thing, right? Those those situations that you go through, it's like a wormhole, right? And you can
Yep.
get through life by copying and imitating success, and if you don't do that,
Yep.
obviously, yeah, it creates a longer path to the goal you're looking to reach.
Mhm.
And by doing so, I've learned so much quicker, right? And learned how to understand those wormholes. And what I was mentioning was now I've got my train of thought. When I got out of prison
Mhm.
and I got taken to an immigration jail, I had to start programming my mind for when I would see my family here. You're a
Mhm.
dirtbag. You're an ex-convict. You're an ex-heroin addict. You're an
Mhm.
ex-junkie. You're a fucking thief. You are the lowest of
Yep.
the fucking lowest, right? And I programmed my mindset to accept that before I even faced them,
Yep.
and everything started to build, right? And then I just said, "All right, how do you do this? Show me exactly how you do this. I'm gonna do
Mhm.
it." Boom. It was like that ladder every
Mhm.
time, right? And it's like a wormhole that you
Yep.
get through now. So if you were to share one growth hack, one wormhole that people can access, that people can use today, right?
Yep.
What would you advise them to start doing now to make a difference tomorrow?
Um, so I'll give you two, and I think they're two very tactical thing. I'm going to start with the one that I think is the foundation of everything, and it aligns with what I was just talking about as far as values are
Mhm.
concerned. Um, when I was probably 22, 23, I read Think and Grow Rich, right? And I think somewhere in there was something about really making sure that you knew what your principles were, your guiding principles, right? So I wrote down like 12 guiding principles of success, right? And it was work hard and smart, and what goes around comes
Mhm.
around, and always ask for feedback and all these things. And I use that to dictate a lot of stuff. So like when I would hire people, I would show them, hey, look, this is like, I'm not saying you need to have these principles here, but just know that where my feedback comes
Mhm.
from, it comes from
Yeah.
this, right? And it really helped me guide, what I was, my decisions and how I approach things and whatever else. But I wasn't overly conscious of it, right? And then when things fell apart for me about 2 or 3 years ago, after my dad passed away, and I was kind of lost and kind of going through some shit I couldn't figure out. I ended up getting a business coach and getting back and resetting on my why,
Okay.
right? My the Simon Sinek
Mhm.
why and my values. And I think the why is I think it's extremely important, but I don't think you can really hit your why until you've experienced some shit. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like telling a 15-year-old kid, 20-year-old kid, "Hey, what's your why?" I think that's a fool's errand
Pussy
right
is
there,
their
right?
why.
But right, exactly. But values, I think those are real. Like I know
Yep.
those are real. And they shouldn't change much. You can adjust them every once in a while, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
to reprioritize things. But going through that value exercise, it was incredible because I really sat down and the value, yeah, anybody can Google, core value exercise, and there's a million of them out there. But really the way it works is there's like 50 values, that words, right? And you choose the 20 or so that you really identify with, and then you get those down to like the 5 that you really identify with, and you prioritize those, like what's your number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And once that was nailed down and I thought about it hard,
Mhm.
like really what do these things mean to me, it helped me make a lot of it made everything so much easier for me from a decision standpoint. I call it your decision stack. Like if you know your why
Mhm.
and your values, there's your decision stack, because now you look for opportunities that align with your why and your values.
Mhm.
Because if you, Shane, if you and I have the same values, right, we can argue all day long, but we'll eventually come to a point of, okay, like respect, and we'll work together on
Yeah.
this. But if you and I have different values, we're just going to yell at each
Exactly.
other, and we'll never come to something, right? And it'll never work if you and I have different values, right? So with those values locked in, now I could look for opportunities, like job opportunities with those, like that aligned with my values, people that I wanted to align myself with that aligned with those values. And it just made things, and then go away from things that didn't align with my values, even if the money was there,
Mhm.
you know what I mean, even if somebody was going to throw money, but if they didn't align with my values, okay, it was actually an easy decision for me to walk away from that money
Yep.
because I knew it didn't align with it. So that would be my number one, is everybody right now, I think, needs to go through the value exercise and really understand what's truly important to them and what truly matters, right?
Mhm.
And then the other thing is just test everything, right? Like, somebody asked me, John, if you could go back and tell your 22-year-old some, what would it be, right? Number one answer is A/B split test everything you do, because you're doing the activities anyways,
Mhm.
right? So, for instance, right, you're making cold
Yep.
calls, right? Most reps just make, it's a smiling dials. You're going to call as many people. No, 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 no. Okay, you're going to make those 50 dials. You're going to make those 100 dials. Great. Instead of making 50 generic cold calls with a generic elevator pitch, pick one
Yep.
persona, right? CIOs, healthcare, whatever
Mhm.
it is. Come up with two different messages that you think will resonate based on their priorities, whatever you meant, right? And make $25 with this approach and make $25 with that approach, and see which one gets you a more, higher response rate. If you got one email, so you got 50 emails that can all go to one group of people because they all fit a similar profile, fine, send it all 50, but break it up 25, 25, tweak the subject line. See if you get a higher open rate on one of
Yep.
them. Objection handling. I would say objection handling isn't rocket science. It's just science. Write down an objection that you're getting smoked on right now, right? And Google best way of handling this objection, right? You'll find a bunch of idiots like me putting blog posts out there about tips and techniques and
Yeah.
whatever. Go find two that you like that fit with your
Yep.
style, right? The next 10 times that objection comes up, deal with it this way. The next 10 times, deal with it that way. By doing that, by becoming a scientist and forgetting, like, the art of sales, people think that sales is an art. I disagree. It's obviously both a science and an art. I think it should be way more of a science, though, than an
Yep.
art, because the science lays the foundation for the art form to be that much more effective.
Mhm.
And if you're just going to rely on your art form, man, you better be a good fucking artist, right? But if you have a scientist, you can actually map out a process, you can test and try
Yep.
things out, and you can see what works and what doesn't work, and you make like meaningful improvements along the way. And so, I mean, even if you think of all the greatest artists in the world, like Picasso is my favorite artist, right? If you think of him, he mastered every medium before he went to the next one, right? So that's why he became Picasso, because he focused on one medium for like
Mhm.
years and mastered that, the science behind that component of the artistic process. And then he built on that, and then he went from there. So you look at Picasso and you're like, holy shit, Picasso, but he is a scientist based on how he got there. And so I think if you look at testing and trying, and the last thing I'll say on that is, not only if you become a scientist will you figure out what works a lot faster, but you'll also stay a lot more motivated. Because let's put it this way, right? Like sales is brutal, right?
Very.
It's one of the I think it's one of the hardest professions out there, right? I mean, not physically hard, obviously. There's others
Mentally
way
is
harder than
hard
that,
than
but
physical, I
mentally
think,
hard.
anyway.
And what used to make it somewhat tolerable was that we all used to be in the bullpen together, getting our asses handed to us together, right? So, like, if you had a bad call or a bad day, you could legit look at your point and be like, shit, you hear that, man? You want to grab a pint? Like, let's
Yep,
go, right? But now that most of us are working from home, like, you have a bad call or a bad day,
it's bad.
who are you going to commiserate with? Your cat, right? So, it's demotivating in this environment, right? But if you become a scientist, right? Because let's say this, let's say you make $50 in a day, right? And you get no meetings. That's a terrible
Yep.
day. And I agree with you. But if you split it up and make $25 with this and $25 with this and still get no meetings, to me, that's actually not a bad day because you just figured out two approaches that don't work.
Mhm.
Tomorrow you come in, try a couple new ones, right? And if you could say you learn something each day, if you could say like, hey, I got better today than I was yesterday, or I learned this, like even if it didn't work, because everything I find out that doesn't work gets me closer to something that does,
Exactly,
right?
yep.
And if you can take that, you will stay motivated and you will excel faster than most. And that's what I didn't do when I was a kid. I didn't pay attention as much. I was just hard work, grinding the shit out of it, just brute force with what I was doing. And I wasn't learning from the stuff that I was doing. I mean, I was learning through
Mhm.
osmosis and whatever. But I wish I was far more thoughtful and proactive with what I was doing and what I was learning from the activities that I was doing
I
anyways.
think I think one thing that helped is this is what I was doing, right? So one thing that helps bring that to life is this image right
Hmm.
here, and I don't know if you can guess the book, but it's by Stephen Covey. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How to win friends.
No, the one, Seven
Oh, Cubby. Yeah. Yeah.
Habits of
Sorry.
Highly Effective People,
Yep. Yeah. That's the
right?
one.
And
Yep.
then in terms of what you're saying with those values, which are right in the middle,
Hmm.
dictate everything how you
Yep.
build your life, and those are the things you can
Yep.
influence. The biggest learning lesson I had from that book, after questioning my wife 20 times to get the right answer, which I don't do, I don't have the patience for it anyway. That's why I'm divorced. But then the second piece was your values and understanding what
Yep.
you can influence and what is a concern. So, just like you said on those
Yep.
behaviors, those A/B testing tricks, the things that you can actually control, they are the things you
Yep.
influence, and then that circle of influence becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and then hopefully your circle of concern shrinks to nothing. And then you
Yep.
just imagine your thoughts as clouds that pass you by, which is another thing that I'm
Hmm.
thankful to have learned. But it makes all the
Hmm.
difference, right? And I think that is something big takeaway. A/B testing right now is big. I'm now trying a new platform. It's called Send Now. Lee Gladish is CEO of the
Hmm.
company. He was the co-founder at Reply.io. And I didn't know about spin tax.
Hmm.
And this
With spin tax.
so I had no fucking idea. So just as you A/B test subject lines, messaging,
Yeah. Yeah.
spin tax basically it will do hi, hello. My name
Ah.
is
Yeah.
nice
Yeah.
to meet you, John. Would you like to grab a
Yeah.
coffee or would you like to get a coffee, right? And it goes throughout the
Yeah.
whole thing. Dude, I've had on 1,400 emails, I've had a 47% reply rate, 3.47 on interested. On interest,
Shit.
right? And
Yeah.
the system is dope. But on that, I think that's a good way to leave
Yeah.
the show. If people can pay attention to those two things: values, understanding what you can influence, A/B test the shit out of your life, emulate
Yep.
success, copycat success, and hopefully you will achieve the same results. It makes again,
Hmm.
this is why I do the show because these things that you're sharing with me, even I'm hoping that they can resonate with the people that obviously follow and watch. And it does make a difference for the
Hmm.
next millionaire. So where can people find you if they want to go on the journey with JB? Where's the
Yeah.
first place they start?
Yeah, I think the website's the easiest, right? Because that's where's all my social channels and everything like that. So jbarrows.com, the letter J B A R R O W S.com. You can also check me out podcasts. I got the Make It Happen Monday podcast where we have conversations like this about entrepreneurship, business, sales, that whole thing. But yeah, I mean, obviously I'm on LinkedIn and all the social channels, but you can find that all through my website. And actually, if you hit my website, you'll see my why, my vision, my values, those type of things too. So you can get aligned with that as well.